Hey everyone, Rua here with part 2 of the Blue Mage guide. I ended up leaving a fair bit out of part 1, so I'll be making sure to amend that in this second video tutorial. Mainly, these were sections on weapon skills, and more importantly on AoE burning. The latter of these two is a pretty advanced aspect of the job, and requires the player to fully grasp the basics of the job itself before attempting it. I'll do my best to demonstrate how it's done well, as it really is one of the Blue Mage's calling cards. Okay, into it. Before we get going, there was an omission I made in part 1, and looking at it again, it was a pretty big one to miss out. Blue Mage can set a unique job trait called Magic Evasion bonus. This trait does exactly what it says on the can. It gives Magic Evasion to help reduce incoming spell damage, and also helps to evade status ailments. This trait is actually cumulative, so it's 3 tiers stacked with each other to give a total of 36 Magic Evasion, provided that you have the job trait bonus 2 trait, that is. Perhaps more spells will be added in the near future, which will let the player push this trait further than the one spell it's currently exclusive to. You'll see this trait give great returns with Saline Coat and Magic Barrier. Okay, this brings us to the weapon skill section I had to leave out. The main thing I'd like new players especially to take away from this section is to not mash Chant du Cygne. Yes, that is actually how you pronounce it, and not mash it over and over. Look, it's a fine weapon skill, but it's not the be-all end-all. It will get the job done, but there's much better ways of dropping a target than just spamming it. CDC, and I'll stick to calling it that because French isn't my first language, is a 3-hit weapon skill with a dex modifier, FTP transfer, and a chance to critical hit. It's a solid weapon skill, but as you get better gear for the alternatives, it will start losing out to said alternatives. If solo, it still will be your go-to when Chain Affinity or Azure Law are both down, because it can also self-light. The first of these is Savage Blade. Savage Blade is a 2-hit weapon skill with a Strength and Mind modifier, and which scales very well with higher TP. Savage Blade also gets really nasty when you stack WSD equipment with it. I personally use the Sequence, the Aeonic Sword, for the TP bonus to help its damage, but I have heard some great things from the recently added Final Form Ambuscade Sword. More on that in another video soon to come. Expiation is a strange weapon skill. It's similar to Savage Blade in that it's a 2-hitter, it scales really well with high TP, and that it gets really strong when you stack WSD gear with it. It differs in that it has different modifiers, 3 modifiers actually, Strength, Intelligence and Dexterity rather than just Strength and Mind. Expiation's real trick is that an Afterglow Tizona, that's the mythic sword if you're keeping score, increases its damage by 30%. I've seen some veteran Blue Mages swear by using a Tizona with a TP bonus Magian sword in the offhand for highest DPS, but I wouldn't expect new or returning players to have both of those to hand out the gate. I'm also personally not entirely sold on that combo in serious endgame. More on that in a moment. Skill chaining with the club is a very niche thing, but with the recent addition of the Maxentius, it's got some good applications. Clubs will mess up undead weak to blunt damage, and the Maxentius itself will provide you your best magic burst numbers. Black Halo, a club's strongest weapon skill, pretty much mirrors an ideal Savage Blade set. The Mind modifier is just higher than the Strength modifier. Again, it's really niche, but it's good to have around as an option. You'll want to have as many weapon skills as you can get, as that gives you much better avenues for skill chaining, and there's a very good chance that will be expected of you for group content. I would make getting and gearing for Savage Blade and Expiation a priority. This is my standard TP build. I know I said in part 1 that you should follow the sets on the Auction House Forum's own guide, but I really want to single this set out. This set is similar to a conventional high-end TP set, but it ensures that Subtle Blow is near capped without losing too much in key stats. In a straight up Zerg rush you won't need a set like this, but you'll want it for solo or low man play, especially if whatever you're fighting has very nasty TP attacks and is also resistant to sudden lunge. My thoughts on the TP bonus Magian sword might be a bit controversial, but here goes. The high-end content, I'm honestly not sold on it being the best there is in the offhand. That sword has no innate skill, so it's going to miss like crazy, severely hurting your TP game. You could have your support stack accuracy buffs to compensate, but that's very selfish. If support have to go out of their way to cater for you when you're the only DD there who needs additional accuracy support, then you're going to be hurting the overall damage output of your group just to compensate for your own optional accuracy deficit. I'd be content with a decent eye level sword in the offhand personally, Aria may or not. Here's my set for Savage Blade and Expiation. It's actually pretty easy to get a decent set out the gate for both of them. All it needs is a few Ambuscade wins, 2 pieces of Herculean armor, a few Omen runs, and entry to Dynamis Divergence Juno. The legs will be the highest cost here. I still only have them at +2 because the materials to +3 are insanely expensive, but the 2 shards to +2 it shouldn't break the bank. Like I said earlier, you want to stack the modifiers, strength being best, and skill damage. Finally, we're on to AoE Burning. First principles, just why is a blue mage so good at this? It's pretty much a combination of its unmatched crowd control spells, coupled with its personal durability, and also how elemental blue magic differs from typical elemental magic. You see, AoE spells cast by a black mage lose power with the more targets they hit with a spell. Elemental blue magic completely ignores this mechanic, so a spell which hits a single target will have the same power as a spell that hits 20 targets. This is exactly how high-level elemental blue magic spells annihilate crowds of fodder monsters. Your spell set for using AoE spells is going to be radically different from the ones you use for your other roles. I've covered some of the spells already in this set in part 1, but the ones I didn't, I'll be sure to cover them here. Feel free to use my set as a template if you want, alternatively you do have options on the auction house website. You're going to need both Erratic Flutter and in some instances Mighty Guard. You're not using them for melee attack speed reduction of course, you're using them to get your spell recast timers as low as you possibly can. Flutter also gives the fast cast trait by itself, so it's absolutely essential for doing this. You need some defensive spells as well, so that's Occultation, Barrier Tusk and Cocoon all ticked off. Here's where we get into some of the spells I didn't cover last time. Memento Mori gives a static +20 to magic attack bonus, and is itself used in creating additional tiers of the same trait. You're going to want this one. Plasma Charge isn't always necessary, but it can save lives. It's the only shock spike spell Blue Mage gets, and I found it's rather strong. You're also going to want a healing spell. I personally go with Restore All since it's the strongest self-target heal Blue Mage gets. It gives 3 tiers of max HP boost by itself, and because it's more or less a guaranteed full heal. You won't be spending precious seconds recasting Magic Fruit over and over as your timers tick down. In some situations, this could literally be the difference between life and death. The crucial spell here is Karcharian Verve. If you remember back to part 1, I briefly mentioned this spell, but for AoE burning you need it. End of. Verve's Aqua Veil is incredible for players attempting this for the first few times, until they get a spell interruption rate down set especially. Verve also gives the same MAB value as Memento Mori, and with Diffusion it lasts a pretty long time. It's worth remembering that if you're burning in Eshku or Race and Jima, you can restore Unbridled Learning's reuse timer with the Super Revitalizer to get Verve back if it falls at a very bad time. You should not charge into a horde of monsters without either Verve being up or without your interruption set being fully sorted. Entomb is the Earth spell of the bunch. It does the least amount of damage of most of the elemental spells, but its additional effect is the most useful I've found. Entomb inflicts a very strong Petrify on everything it hits, lasting up to a full minute if it's fully unresisted. Entomb actually overwrites itself as well, so you could technically use it over and over until everything around you dies, but this isn't really necessary. Entomb's damage is lower than the other spells because it uses Vitality as a modifier. Bit odd, but enjoy it for what it is. Anvil Lightning is a lot stronger than Entomb, and it still does slow everything around the blue mage down by stunning them. It's got a dex modifier, but it still does decent damage. I personally don't use it for burning all that often though, you'll see why soon enough. Blinding Fulgur also does decent damage, and its additional effect likewise mitigates some of the damage you'd take in turn by hitting everything around you with flash. A great thing to help occultation go the distance. Fulgur has 3 modifiers, low modifiers at that, so generally speaking you're going to need burst affinity to make it competitive. Tenebral Crush is one of the 2 big hitters. Not only does it have Int and Mind as 2 of its 3 modifiers, but it's also darkness based, so darkness affinity equipment pushes its damage very high. With these 2 pieces, the Pixie Hairpin and the Archon Ring, along with burst affinity, it's not uncommon to see Tenebral Crush just flatten everything around you, even if it's a much higher level than yourself. It's also used in the magic accuracy bonus job trait, so it's typically a mainstay of spell sets. Spectral Flow is the major big hitter, the hardest hitting elemental spell of the bunch most of the time. It has a large int modifier, so under burst affinity it's pretty much guaranteed to be a one-shot wipeout. Remember, the modifier gets doubled, and then some more with JSE. But you need to have a good set to make it do good damage against high-end targets, especially in situations when you don't have Vor Seals. Spectral Flow setting 3 tiers of magic attack bonus by itself is just the cherry on top. Subduction is a very fun spell to use. It's got the lowest damage of all the elemental spells, even lower than Entomb, but its additional effect is freaking nasty. Subduction inflicts a very strong gravity effect on everything it hits, 76%, that's absolutely insane. That's like taking a well-geared red mage's Gravity 2 spell and making it AoE while also doing damage. Although it doesn't hit very hard, its very low MP cost and very short recast timer means it can be spammed while the blue mage stands out of reach, using the gravity to maintain a good distance while bombarding the horde with it over and over. Subduction, like Spectral Flow, also gives the magic attack bonus trait by itself, so it can be used to push the trait further. You're gonna like this one. Your idle DT set is going to be important whenever you're AoE burning without a dedicated tank job to gather everything up for you. A blue mage is more than capable of doing this completely solo, within reason, and a good set will make sure of it. You need to get as close to the 50% DT cap as you can, while also keeping the Carmine legs in for their movement speed bonus. Because if something cannot even catch you, then that's better than any amount of DT in that slot. If you don't hit 50% DT exactly, don't worry. Remember that Barrier Tusk counts as 15%, and it will break the cap if you go beyond 50. The next set I'll show you is the set I use for casting elemental blue magic. The 2 best clubs for elemental spells are the Maxentius and the Kaja Rod, with the Nibiru Codgels putting in a very fine display to come in just behind these 2. The problem with the Nibiru Codgels is that they give a lot of int for Spectral Flow, but they won't buff up spells like Tenebral as well as the Maxentius and the Kaja will, since they use additional modifiers. Still, they're great for new players to get out the gate, and they will last quite some time. I typically use the Artifact Legs and MP Feet for spells, because they have good modifier stats, and because they push Burst Affinity's modifier bonus even further, effectively buffing every spell used with it. HQ Almaric will pretty much win out in those 2 slots when Burst Affinity is not up. I should talk about the Jacri set as well, as it's going to be the first set for elemental spells a new or returning player will probably use. Jacri looks great on the surface, decent stats for spells, a lot of MAB and magic accuracy as well. There is, however, a major problem with the set though. It has 6% total haste on it. That's not good. That will do some serious damage to your spell recast timers, and that might be what ultimately undoes you, especially for attempting this solo. There is a way to mitigate some of the problem, but not completely remove it. You need to put 10% haste on the ambuscade cape you use for spell damage. I do this for my current set to ensure it's capped anyway. Look to upgrade from Jackery when you can, but you can use it until you do. Just beware of this shortcoming. Here's a few tips for AoE burning. The first and most important thing I can say is to make sure you have Verve up before you charge into a crowd, or to have your spell interruption set on for the entirety of Dreamflower's casting. You see, even if you begin most of your spells in a spell interruption set, when you change into your set for max damage towards the end of the cast, it's going to leave you open for interruption, which will certainly happen if you have so much attacking you. Don't open with an elemental spell. You need the crowd under control so you have time to think about your next move. Knock them out and buy yourself some time. Dreamflower casts quickly enough even without max fast cast, so it being cast in an interruption set isn't an issue. Refer back to the set I showed in part 1 if you need to see it again. My next tip is to remind you not to get greedy with a pull. This applies when it's down to you to pull everything, and for when you don't have a dedicated tank job to do it for you, but it's still an important lesson to know regardless. Despite your defensive spells, you're not as sturdy as a paladin or a rune fencer, so don't push your luck. If you're taking too much damage mid-pull, stop, hit Dreamflower and recover before going on to gather the rest of the targets you need to. Dreamflower will not overwrite itself, but it has a good duration, so it should give you a solid window of opportunity to get everything bunched together. Make sure you bunch everything together, your spells still have a limited range. It's also important not to forget Burst Affinity. Sure, you're not going to be magic bursting with it, but remember, it boosts the modifiers of the spells it's used with. I've said this a bunch of times already, but it really does bear repeating. Even with a maximum power spell, you're probably going to get the occasional straggler that survives, something which got really lucky on a magic resistance check. You can handle 1 or 2 stragglers though. Remember what I said about Entomb earlier? Entomb doesn't do as much damage as the other spells, but it has the best crowd control effect for a spell that does decent enough damage. Entomb is brilliant to use as a staging spell of sorts, to ensure that your Burst Affinity spell to follow will result in a wipeout. I like to do this when against a really large crowd, where one mistake or a string of resists could undo me. I like to use Entomb followed by Spectral Flow or Tenebral Crush personally, that usually gets the job done. My last tip is about MP management. This is another carryover from part 1, but it especially applies here. If you don't have support, then you're going to run out of MP quickly. Even Tizona users will, since they won't get the chance to melee to get their MP back. The answer is Magic Hammer, as it's a spell you should be setting anyway for the magic attack bonus trait. If your MP is low, have a look through the monsters in your crowd and see if you notice something there with MP you can take. If there is something there, use Magic Hammer and top yourself up before finishing off the crowd with a big hitter. This brings us to the end of the guide. I'm not the best Blue Mage player there is, but I think I've done enough to convey its core mechanics and pass on some of its lessons to other players. It's taken a while to complete this, and I appreciate your understanding in it taking a while to do so. The next time I cover Blue Mage's mechanics will be when it gets adjusted in a future update. We're not done quite yet though. Hear me out for a moment and give me your opinion on whether or not I should do this. While I was requesting some of its artifact pieces, I went through the Blue Mage storyline again and was forcibly reminded why its lore is so interesting. I've never done this before, but I'm actually very tempted to put together a video on the lore of the job, as it really is that incredible. Of all the jobs I've come across and mastered in this game, Blue Mage easily has the best in-game story behind it. It's also pretty heavily laden with spoilers, so I would have to warn people about that, otherwise it could really ruin the experience. We'll have to see. This could even be considered a third part to the guide, and it's something I might even consider going back to other jobs I've previously covered, if the interest is there. I'll leave that to you, my audience, to decide on. I'll see you all next time.